The fighting game community anxiously awaits the release of Street Fighter 6, a game that we talked about on the channel as a game that is doing everything right. But what if I told you that everything Street Fighter 6 can achieve only pales in comparison to what Project L, the League of Legends fighting game, can actually do? I knew Project L could be big, but now that I've sat down and ran the numbers, I don't think anyone is ready for this. Right now it feels like Street Fighter 6 is going to take over the world. Having recently gone to UFA, the biggest fighting game tournament of the year in Europe, everyone I talked to shared this sentiment. We cannot wait for Street Fighter 6. And this was true no matter who I talked to. Street Fighter players, Tekken players, fighters, Strive, everyone. And it's well deserved because, like I said, Street Fighter 6 is doing everything right. We've got good rollback netcode as experienced by the closed beta. We've got crossplay on all platforms. We've got features for hardcore fighting game players like online ranked, spectator mode for tournaments, a very robust training mode with frame data, recording options, and everything else you could want. And we got casual features to bring in new players like a story mode complete with character creation, some silly game modes, and an easy input system. In fighting games, we usually have a checklist of things we'd like to see, and whenever games do like 5 out of those 10 things on the checklist, it does pretty okay. For instance, I love Fighters, but it's got a terrible story mode and horrible netcode. MK11 has a great story and netcode, but boy, it's hard to get into MK because it does things different from everybody else, so in a way, it's lacking that accessibility. I love Guilty Gear Strive, but that lobby system and the towers instead of a normal ranked system are the result of a developer being stubborn despite the community's feedback. There's always a but with fighting games. However, Street Fighter 6 is not doing everything right. It's going above and beyond, doing things that we never even thought of asking, but they're generally great ideas. We didn't need a frame data visualizer, all we asked for was a number, but this makes frame data so much more accessible to everyone. And it's because of all these things that everyone is looking forward to Street Fighter 6, and we haven't had a fighting game that everyone is playing for a really long time. It will bring the fighting game community together. Even if everybody keeps playing their own main games, everyone will be on Street Fighter 6. And that brings me to Project L. Street Fighter 6 has all the hype right now because the game is real. We've played it. We know that they're delivering on their promises. Project L doesn't feel real yet. We're still too far away from the main game. So will it do everything that Street Fighter 6 is doing? We don't know. And I honestly doubt it. But it's definitely nailing the most important things for sure. The whole concept of this game is to make things easier for new players coming into the fighting game genre, to allow them to pick up their favorite League characters and figure out what they're doing while rewarding player experience and the hours that you put into the lab if you want to commit to it. This type of accessibility is a requirement to make fighting games bigger than they currently are. And it's not the same thing as dumbing down a fighting game no matter what gatekeepers say. They're doing rollback netcode, which is no surprise since the game's director is Tom Cannon, the creator of GGPO. And not only are they using rollback, they're using Riot Redirect, which is a system Riot's been working on for years for optimizing latency, and they currently use it in League of Legends as well as Valorant. And finally, gameplay looks fun as hell. They've only taken one deep dive in terms of character movesets so far, which was Echo, but immediately we're seeing something unique and potentially a lot of fun, with how he leaves an echo of himself behind with his moves and then can rewind himself to that position, mixing up the opponent or extending combos. It looks so cool. That said, there's no word on single player content or what training mode looks like or what are the online game modes. We don't even know if there will be crossplay, so it's not a real full game yet. Project L is, however, doing something that even Street Fighter 6 isn't, which is going free to play. That has worked very well for Riot so far, but in fighting games we don't have a lot of free to play examples. Let's talk about success in fighting games. Looking at the biggest modern fighting games, we have Street Fighter V with 6.6 million copies sold, Dragon Ball FighterZ with 8 million, and Tekken 7 with 9 million. Only a handful of fighting games have been able to cross that 10 million threshold in the entire history of fighting games. Above 10 million we got MK11 and MKX with 12 million each, Smash Brawl with 13.3, Street Fighter 2 with 15.5, and the biggest one, Smash Bros Ultimate with a staggering 28.8 million. With Project L being free to play, making projections based on sales is hard, but luckily we did have a recent launch of a free to play fighting game, and that was Multiversus, and that will help us bridge the gap between paid and free to play. According to Steam charts, Multiversus had at a single point in time 153,000 players actively playing the game, which made it the most played fighting game in history on Steam ever. Of the games we mentioned, Dragon Ball FighterZ had the record at 44,000 players. Although disclaimer, these are Steam numbers, we can't compare this to games like Smash because Nintendo will never release those numbers. So congrats Multiversus, you win because Nintendo doesn't want to play. And I would argue the main platform where people play Multiversus isn't even on the PC. The game has crossplay, cross-save, I bet the majority is on consoles. So the first big fighting game to try free to play broke the record of the most concurrent players by a lot. Surely that's enough to prove that free to play is the future and it will be much more successful than the previous model. Well, Multiversus had a big drop off. If you check Steam charts now, it has around 1,000 to 3,000 players daily, which compared to those big launch numbers, that's a big deal. Which is still not bad compared to Dragon Ball FighterZ, which currently has around 1,000 players daily. It's just a much bigger drop than where they were before. And again, we're just looking at Steam numbers, we can't see console numbers. It does pale in comparison to a game like Brawlhalla, which still consistently has 13 to 14,000 active players, but that's a goddamn unicorn. So you can conclude that yes, a lot of players will check out your game because it's free to play, but a very small number will stick with it. So it's almost like buying fake followers on Twitter. But I don't think the free to play was the reason why the drop off happened. I reached out to Avatar Yaya, who's a lot more in touch with the Multiverses community, and free to play may have had some influence on how bloated that initial number was, but the drop off seems to be mainly caused by a few issues that took too long to be fixed. The game had rollback, but the servers were super unstable. If you played on PS4 or Xbox One and you were in a crossplay match with a new generation of consoles or PC, the match would start, but you would be stuck on the loading screen. You could hear the match going, but you can see the match going. And it's getting new characters at a very good pace, but not enough content around those characters. It launched with only quick play and private lobbies, didn't even have ranked matches until recently, and it's definitely getting content now, but it's maybe too late. So in theory, free to play doesn't necessarily mean, yeah, great numbers at the start, bad numbers in the long run. Ultimately, it's up to the game to hold those players. And now that we've established that, here is how Project L can do compared to this. Here's the numbers we have. Currently, League of Legends has an average of 13 million players every day. You see that Multiverse's record of 150 peak? League of Legends average is that times 80. Now, obviously, you can't expect all League of Legends players to transition over to the fighting game. Some would say not even a fraction will move over, because that's also what they said about Valorant. League players will never move to a first-person shooter, and now Valorant has around 2 million players every day. It's not 13 million, but it's a good chunk of that. And that's not just League players, obviously. Valorant was good enough to pull people from Counter-Strike and Overwatch. And Valorant came out 2 years ago. Still has 2 million players daily. That's impressive. So let's say a tenth of that plays Project L. Let's face it, first-person shooters are still a lot more popular than fighting games, so we can't expect the same number as Valorant. So divided by 10, that would still put the active player base of Project L at 200,000 active players. That's not launch numbers, that is sustained over time, provided the game does everything right. Sustained over time players are more than the peak of Multiverses on Steam. And I think cutting Valorant's number down to a tenth is a pretty conservative guess, because Project L might not be confined to PC. They haven't announced consoles yet, but I think it only makes sense. Riot is doing a great job of making League bigger than the game it started with, by making other Riot products like Valorant and Arcane, the Netflix show. I'm not a League of Legends fan, but after watching Arcane, yeah, I'll play a fighting game of that. And I think League players are so ready for new concepts now, even more so than they were back when Valorant came out. And they're actually looking forward to seeing their favorite characters in a new setting. And on top of that, we have Game Pass. Riot recently announced a collaboration with Xbox Game Pass, where if you own Game Pass, you're getting a few extra goodies on all Riot games. The Xbox market for fighting games is huge and very untapped. There are so many potential players on Xbox who don't even give the genre a shot, because fighting games that have no crossplay just arrive at Xbox dead. And if the game has crossplay, there will be a much bigger incentive to draw the Xbox crowd in, because they get a lot more from whatever they give away with Game Pass. It's no surprise that in the games industry, the biggest games end up influencing everything. When PUBG blew up, suddenly we had a race between the biggest developers in the world to put out their own battle royale game before the market became saturated. Fighting games have had the same developers for a while: Capcom, Bandai Namco, Arc System Works, SNK, NetherRealm. It's very rare that a new player enters the game and joins the big names up there. If Project Well takes off and does well, would that influence other IPs such as Overwatch, Apex Legends to make a fighting game? I would love to see more fighting games join the rotation. Yes, I just stole Cloud's tweet. This has already happened in fighting games with Smash. How many Smash clones came out thanks to Smash's success? Brawlhalla, Multiverses, Nickelodeon, Rivals of Ether, PlayStation All-Stars. Not all of them were a huge success, but it sure inspired other developers to pursue that, and some of those developers were pretty big names. But ultimately, this is why I think that Project L can, and most likely will, change fighting games forever. Not just because it will be a huge game on its own, but because it will influence the whole industry to follow through. With that said, I can't wait for Street Fighter 6. It's doing everything right, and I talk about it right here in this video. Also, Jamie drowns himself with his own drink. And as always, thank you very much for watching. My name is Globku, and I'll see you next time. Bye!